Did you know that 40% of plastic waste is made up of packaging that is used just once and then discarded, with only a small portion of it being recycled? Reuse systems are one circular solution to reduce this waste, and today we are going to learn about new work being done that is helping standardize how reuse systems operate. My name is Cailin Perry, Program Manager at Circular Innovation Council, and I'm your host of today's podcast episode in celebration of Circular Economy Month, a month-long campaign dedicated to educating Canadians about circular economy and its benefits and empowering behavior change. This podcast is part of a series where we spotlight circular action and change makers across Canada. In this episode, which will air during Plastics Thursday during Circular Economy Month, we are featuring a brand new standard for reuse systems developed by CSA Group in collaboration with PR3. CSA is one of the champion sponsors of the Circular Economy Month campaign, and today I'm joined by Wathma Jayathilake, Program Manager, Environment and Climate Change at CSA, where she leads national standards efforts advancing sustainability and climate action. Her portfolio spans circular economy, carbon intensity, climate resilience, life cycle assessment, and ESG. She has over 7 years of experience in standards development, contributing to the development of standards and consensus building efforts across multiple sectors, including environment and climate change. Wathma holds a Bachelor of Science in Biomedical Sciences from University of Ottawa. Welcome, Wathma, and thank you for joining me today. So I have a lot of questions for you, so let's jump right into it. So first of all, for listeners who might not have heard of CSA before, what does CSA Group do?
CSA Group, also known as the Canadian Standards Association, is one of those organizations you've probably encountered without even knowing it. If you've ever plugged in a lamp, worn a hockey helmet, or seen that little CSA mark on a product, or worked in a building, CSA has been there in the background. We're a global organization made up of two parts, our nonprofit standards development organization and our for-profit subsidiaries that do testing, inspection, and certification. And collectively, our organization is dedicated to safety, social good, and sustainability. CSA's standards development organization in particular develops standards, but we're also leaders in research, in education, and advocacy. We've developed over 3,000 standards together with our more than 11,000 volunteer expert members who represent various sectors and industries. And together, these standards that we've developed quietly shape the world around us. They keep us safe and they keep things safe. They keep systems reliable and they help us tackle new challenges, whether that's climate change and new and emerging technologies or the circular economy.
Great. And yes, CSE, we work a lot with CSA Group and we are very involved in a lot of the standards and work that you do. And it's really great to see all the amazing research and standards that are coming out lately. So if you had to sum it up in one line, why do standards like reuse matter for building a more sustainable future?
Standards help take new ideas like reusable packaging and reuse and translates them into clear, credible requirements that businesses, governments, and consumers can rely on. Without standards, it'd be quite difficult to scale reuse safely and consistently. But with them, we create systems that are implementable and ready to integrate into regulations when governments are ready and choose to do so. And so to clarify, our standards are voluntary consensus documents, and they're made mandatory through referencing in codes and regulations. And that is one of the most direct ways that we as standards developers can have impact and support building a more sustainable future.
Great. And looking at reuse and the recent standard that you just came out last month. So why is reuse such a critical piece of the circular economy puzzle?
Yeah. Reuse isn't new. It's something we used to do all the time with things like milk bottles and soda bottles. What's new is we're bringing it back, but we're bringing it back at scale in a way that works for modern day and modern life. And like back then, trust is critical and essential. People believed back then that those milk bottles were safe. And today, CSA's new standard helps us create that same confidence. Reuse has the potential to cut down packaging production, reduce pollution, and lower greenhouse gas emissions compared to single-use packaging. In fact, reusable packaging could reduce greenhouse gas emissions by up to 70% compared to single-use plastic products. And 85% of all plastic packaging, including food and beverage containers, ends up in landfills or as unregulated waste. So when we reuse a container, 20, 30, 50 times, we're cutting down on production, reducing emissions, and keeping waste out of our landfills and our oceans. But reuse isn't just about that container. It's about what happens after as well. How it's collected, how it's washed, how it's inspected, how it's redistributed, and how it's tracked. With so many steps involved, consistency and trust are what hold that system together. And that's really where standards step in. They bring the consistency and the safety into the system so everyone can participate with confidence. And that's why CSA and PR3 collectively are developing this series of reuse standards to provide the design and operational backbone, so to speak, that makes reuse systems scalable and credible.
Yeah, and it's really great that you guys are doing it. Our organization has been implementing reuse over in the last year through our Reuse Ottawa pilot that listeners might be familiar with. And we're really proud to be part of the development of this standard as it's been really helpful for our own work as well. Um, so what are some of the biggest barriers that currently prevent organizations from adopting reuse systems?
Yeah, the barriers are familiar. Their cost, their complexity, and their trust. Building washing facilities and collection networks is expensive. Regulations are also still catching up. And consumers also need to be convinced that a reused cup is just as safe as a new single-use one. And so standards are a key part of that solution, as I mentioned earlier, bringing that consistency and safety to the forefront. They set out exactly how containers should be cleaned and inspected. They make sure health and safety are baked into that system. And maybe most importantly, they create interoperability. And that means companies and cities don't all have to invent their own systems. They can share infrastructure and even data, which makes reuse more efficient and more scalable.
Yeah, exactly. It's so helpful and as more and more reuse systems are becoming more popular across the country, it's really important that we have a more standardized system to it um, for scaling it and implementation. Um, so going on to the role of standards, so CSA recently released the first in its reuse standards series on container washing, inspection, and packing for distribution. Could you explain a bit about what this standard covers and why it matters?
Yeah, I certainly can. So when you think about reuse, the whole system hinges on one simple question: can I trust this container? In a reuse system, food, beverages, and other products are provided in reusable containers that can be then returned through collection points, transported for professional cleaning and sanitizing, and delivered back for refilling and reuse. So if people aren't sure a cup or a box is clean, they won't use it. And that's exactly what our new standard on container washing aims to tackle. It covers all the essentials: how facilities should be designed, how staff should be trained, the washing and sanitization steps, the inspection process to catch any defects, and even how containers get packed to avoid recontamination. But why does that matter? Because safety and trust are everything. If people don't believe that reused packaging is clean, they won't use it. And so this new standard, CSA R303, creates that trust by giving operators a clear evidence-based framework. And because it's recognized in both Canada and the US, it's not just a local solution. It helps build that consistency across borders, which is really huge for scaling reuse. And at the end of the day, the standard isn't just about those technical details, while those are very important. It's also about building trust, which is kind of a common theme today. And that trust is what makes reuse possible.
Yeah, that's really, really important. And I know when CIC was developing our reuse Ottawa pilot program, looking into container washing and the logistics side was such a huge part of the planning process. So it's really great to have a standard that can really make that process a bit easier. So could you share some of the behind the scenes details of developing the standard? Who was involved, what were the major discussion points during the building of the consensus for the final product?
The process was a true collaboration between CSA Group in Canada and PR3 in the US. The committee included a broad mix. We had municipalities, government, big brands, reuse startups, and other organizations like Circular Innovation Council. The hard conversations, those were around things like hygiene. How strict do we make those protocols? Around cost, how do we make this feasible for small operators, not just big corporations? And around alignment, how do we make sure the rules work on both sides of the border so the standard can serve Canada and the US? It wasn't easy, but that is the exciting part of consensus. You have all the experts at the table advocating for what matters in their world, and together we landed on something that works for the whole system.
Yeah, that's collaboration is such a huge part of circular economy and building circular solutions is it's not just one organization or one government that can put circular economy into action. It's really made possible through collaboration of different organizations working together. Um, Okay, so talking about the impact of the standards so far, how can growth stage companies or municipalities practically apply these standards in their operation?
Yeah, for businesses, adopting our standard means that they don't need to start from scratch. They can integrate proven hygiene and safety practices identified in the standard into their operations from day one. And for cities and municipalities, referencing the standard in their procurement means that anyone running a reuse system in your community is meeting a clear and trustworthy bar. And beyond operations, the standard requires things like record keeping and data tracking, which helps show the impact, not just that the containers themselves are safe, but that the system is efficient and reducing waste in a measurable way.
And what does reuse look like for kind of from the everyday consumer's point of view? And how can the standards help make reuse not just possible, but convenient and trustworthy, and make them want to use these systems?
As I mentioned earlier, for consumers, reuse has to feel simple and seamless. You grab a container, you use it, you drop it off, and trust that the next one that you get is also safe. And standards like CSA R303 helps to ensure that those containers are properly cleaned and inspected before they go back into circulation. And that builds the trust and makes reuse not just possible, but attractive and practical for consumers.
Right. So looking ahead, so we often talk about systems and infrastructure, but what role does culture and behavior change play? Kind of jumping off that last question, and how can standards really support that shift?
Um, Infrastructure is, of course, one side of the story, but people's habits are the other. The standards help to create that consistency that makes new habits stick. So when the system looks and feels the same everywhere you go, whether you're in Vancouver or Edmonton or Montreal, it becomes normal. And that consistency is what helps shift consumer habits at scale. And the next reuse standard in the series, or one of the next standards, is going to be dealing with labeling and visual cues, the stuff that people actually see and interact with every day. And that is also going to be a huge lever for changing behavior, making reuse more intuitive and just part of everyday life.
Yeah, so and I think you touched this on in your last question just now. So our 303 is just the beginning. What's next for standards for this reuse standard series?
Yeah, R303 focuses on the washing and distribution, but the full series is much bigger. We'll be publishing the standards for things like container design, systems operation and performance, collection points, labeling, as I mentioned earlier, and data management. And together, this whole full suite of standards creates a full blueprint for reuse infrastructure from, the container that you get in your hand to the back end systems that track that container.
Great, we're really excited to continue being a part of this and working with you with CSA Group on the next phase of these standards. So my last question for you is, so for organizations listening today that want to engage with this new standard, what are the first steps that they can take?
The first step is to get involved, and there are a few different ways to do that. One of the most impactful ways is to join our CSA technical committee. These are the groups where the real work of developing standards happen, and they're made up of people with different expertise and lived experiences. And so by joining, you get a seat at the table to help shape the requirements that will guide reuse across Canada and beyond. Every draft standard also goes through a public review process where anyone can provide comments as well. And that feedback is the cornerstone of our standards development process. Your voice could help make our standards even stronger and more broadly applicable. So that's another avenue to get involved. And finally, one of the most immediate steps that you can take is to use the standard directly in your operations, if of course it's applicable to you. If you're running or piloting a reuse program, integrating CSA R303 and eventually the other reuse system standards into your practices gives you a proven framework for safety and consistency. And more importantly, as you use it, you can directly provide feedback to CSA and PR3 for future additions. And so that real world insight and what works, what doesn't, where things need to evolve is what keeps standards relevant and useful over time. And so whether it's joining a committee, it's contributing through public review, or adopting the standard in your own operations, there's a pathway for every organization to get involved.
Great. So it sounds like there's a lot of different options for organizations to get involved however they see fit. And if they haven't already seen the standard yet, they can go to CSA's website.
Yes, our standard is available for free view on the CSA store at csagroup.org/store. Or they can also access it through our corporate site at csagroup.org/circular economy.
Great. So thanks, Wathma, so much for taking the time. And thanks to the audience for listening to this podcast today. So, like she just mentioned, to learn more about CSA Group's research and standards, visit csagroup.org. And to learn more about getting involved with Circular Economy Month this October, visit circulareconomymonth.ca. And don't forget to follow along on social media with the hashtag Circular Economy Month. And thank you again.
Thanks, Cailin.